The next section in Chapter 1 of the Introductory Statistics chapter is talking about critical thinking. And again, a lot of what Chapter 1 is about is trying to get you in the, with all due respect to Frank Sinatra, a statistical state of mind rather than a New York state of mind. We're going to talk about all the different things that come to light when using statistics and using different types of statistics and deciding whether the statistical data that you are using is worth using at all. There's a lot of factors that will come into play, and we're going to really zero in on those factors in this particular section. First thing we're going to talk about is the misuse of statistics. And the when. When are statistics misused? First and foremost, when your organization of collecting the data is poor. In terms of, are you doing a mix of voluntary and involuntary samples? Are you doing all voluntary samples? All sorts of different things. The interpretation, what's read from the statistics, could possibly be poor. You could take a different meaning behind the statistics, and it's going to be so critical for us as we move forward to make sure that our conclusions are A, in layman's terms, and B, that they can come free of opinion from the studies that are done. And unfortunately, with the minds that human beings have, you'll tend to see a lot of different interpretations. The perfect example is someone telling someone else they look nice today, and they could simply mean just that they look nice today, but they could take it as, a possible pass at them, or saying that they don't look nice other days. There's definite interpretive feelings behind everyone. The last thing is samples can be bad or biased, especially if they're voluntary. And depending on how the samples are taken, in terms of, are they taken with a select population, with a more general population, does it target a group, does it not target a group, etc. And just a reminder to you that voluntary response samples can be seriously flawed because of the fact that the population is targeted and that people's feelings can vary significantly depending on the topic that you're talking about. Again, we've talked a lot about how politics becomes a big-time hot-button issue, especially these days. Hot-button issue. Finances can become a hot-button issue. Things can really throw some statistical analysis out of whack. Talk about correlation and causation. This is another basic topic that we talked about in the 9th grade integrated algebra course in the state of New York. And correlation is the relationship between any two variables that you're looking at. A perfect example would be someone smoking and possibly their pulse rate. Any different, it doesn't have to be anything relatedly close, but typically when we're talking about statistics, the variables have something in common. Otherwise, there's no correlation whatsoever, and it just becomes misuse of study. The causation is the association that one variable causes the other to occur. A perfect example of that is when the sun rises, the rooster starts crowing. That's a causal relationship. The rooster would not crow if the sun was not rising. So the sun rising causes the rooster to crow. But a huge point to talk about is that correlation does not imply causality. Just because something, it could be perfectly correlated, but it does not mean that there's a cause behind it. several different things you can look at with that. Gas mileage with a car, versus the make of the engine, whether it's V4, i4, or V6. There's a lot of different things you can talk about that. There's no such thing as causation automatically when it comes to correlation. It's something that you really have to study and take an opinion. A couple other ways that we misuse statistics: if your sample sizes are too small. If you're talking about medical studies, are absolutely very prone to do stuff like this. They sit there and they interview like 100 people when there's these 100 people who have lung cancer after 2 years. There's millions of people that have lung cancer after 2 years. You can't say stuff like 100 people when it affects so many. When you read too much into percentages, that really comes along with sample size as well. If I survey 10 people and I say 90% of people are very against secondhand smoke. Well, if I only did 10 people, that means only 9 of them said what I just said. I mean, 9 out of 10 people. I mean, go ahead, do 100 people, do 1,000 people. Percentages get way out of hand, and you'll see this a lot in commercials with all sorts of different percentages and stuff, because they only bothered to survey 10, 20, 30 people. My favorite is the toothpaste and 4 out of 5 dentists. How many did you survey? 5? Like, you found 5 guys and you're willing to pay 4 of them? Like, it doesn't make much sense. Loaded questions can intentionally or unintentionally sometimes sway a respondent. You have to be careful with your questions and whether they're loaded and they're trying to get you in one direction or another. If people refuse to, sorry for the dog in the background, if people refuse to answer questions, that can become a problem, because then you have people could be refusing for all sorts of different reasons. It can be to the point that it gets out of hand in terms of, well, I'm not going to answer questions about this particular topic, and then you don't have as big of a sample size for one question as you do for another. Any type of missing data in terms of any random factors that should be considered. If you're doing a study on people who use the pool in the summertime, from year to year, and you notice that there's a significant decrease from 2012 to 2013. Well, did anybody bother to take a look at the temperatures outside? Did anybody bother to take a look at the number of rainy days? Factors that can be considered into studies. Things that you have to take into account. There are all sorts of different variables that come into play. Self-interest studies, obviously, they become very flawed with their data. Anybody who wants to do a self-interest study, doctors or medicine companies, medicine companies with their newest and latest drug craze and stuff, they'll do self-interest studies all the time. And their data is going to be flawed. And it's basically flawed to the point where they can sit there and put it on television. That's their main goal, is to put it on television, because most people believe anything they see on TV. The precision of the numbers, again, how precise are your numbers? Are you immediately going to the nearest whole number? A lot of times people have difficulty with that in evaluation scales. Sometimes you'll see evaluation scales where you can get tenths of a point, but your overall score will be rounded to the nearest whole number. Well, that implies that a 56.5 is the same as a 57.4. And that's not really fair, because there's 9/10 of a point difference there. And if you're going to break things down into tenths of a point, you have to be really careful about what you're rounding it to in the end. And deliberate distortions, obviously, that's just completely unethical. We talked about the ethics of statistics, and any deliberate distortion of any data is clearly, especially in the advertising business, any of those of you who are going to be going into marketing or advertising in college, understand the fact that is absolutely, without question, against the law. You cannot distort statistics. Even though people try to distort statistics, they cannot do that. It is against the law. Your homework in this section is going to be textbook pages 23 to 25, numbers 2 to 24 even.